So we've got a lot of people up here, so I'm going to try to drive this to get to the questions. So I've asked the speakers to spend no more than 3 to 4 minutes on a brief intro. I'm not going to go over the bios because that'll consume the energy, but if you're interested in their bios, Verde has them online and in the program. So, and unless one of the speakers wants me to talk about their bio, I'm going to save time and go forward. So just to introduce the panel, we have Deputy Mayor Barbara Romero, the Assistant Deputy Director Dan Lafferty. Hi, everyone say hi to Barbara. We have Mia Lara, one of the legends on the LA River, Brian Jordan from Tetra Tech, Dr. Zeynep Erdal from AECOM, and Yuval Bar-Zimmer. Yuval, thank you for coming. We also have as a responder Dr. Mark Gold. So at the end, after everyone gives their 3 to 4 minute talk, and they each get a question from me, Dr. Gold will give his response. And he'll probably talk about inside the river and outside the river issues, and as long as he doesn't get into the 85th percentile storm, I think we're doing all right. Oh, Dan, didn't I mention Dan?
Real quick you did. It was out of order. I came after Barbara.
You are after Barbara.
You did mention me after Barbara. Here, physically, I'm after Zeynep. So.
Oh, I see. But in the speech, you're going to talk after Barbara. Is that all right, Dan?
That's fine with me. That's where you want me to go. I'm perfectly happy with that.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to introduce Barbara Romero and ask her to give the city's current vision of what she and the city want to do with the river. I think that's the easiest way to say it. But she has extensive experience. And Barbara, if you can mention your G2 parcel or something like that, I think we'd be interested. Is everyone okay? We got a quiet group? Okay, let's go.
So I just want to say I'm the Deputy Mayor of City Services for Eric Garcetti, and I oversee 15 departments. And when the mayor asked me to come and work for him, he asked me to come in as a Public Works Commissioner. At that point, I was working at the MRCA, and I was doing cool urban projects across the county. And obviously, LA River was one of them, and I built a couple projects all over the county in Pacoima, in Tahunga, Wash, Compton Creek, and obviously our beloved LA River. And so when the mayor asked me to come, I said, I really love my job. Do I have to leave my job? Because I was working as a planning commission. He says, I want you to come, and I want you to do what you're doing at the MRCA and work on the river. And I want you to come in from your perspective as a kid growing up in Boa Heights, and how you had told me that, you know, the LA River was a barrier. It was an infrastructure barrier. I want you to help me do what you were doing, but at a broad scale for the city. Help me elevate the vision of what the river can mean, not only about connecting communities, but about using our water resource in a different way and creating that value for people. And so for me, you know, I was like, that sounds pretty cool. And I eventually ended up working and becoming the deputy mayor. But our vision at this point is, how do we secure land along the river? Because as you know, with the mayor, we've actually acquired G2, which was something that was, when I came in, he said, how are we going to define our success on the LA River? And I said, unless we secure a parcel that has been in the visions for over 20 years, and people are not going to think we're serious, Mr. Mayor. And so this, you know, we actually have secured that from Union Pacific, and we got it for $60 million. And it took me like over 4 years to get it. But what that means for us is, how do we create a multi-benefit project along the river that not only cleans the water, captures the water, but most importantly connects people to that community. And for me, G2 is the example of what we want to do with the river across our 32 miles. But I just, you know, I'll wait for questions and for conversation, because I could talk all day about it. But I just want to close by saying that we have a responsibility to get people to understand the value of our water system. And the river is one place, one vehicle that really gets people to understand how we can become more sustainable as a city if we actually use the river as the metaphor to do that. So I'll close with that.
Perfect. within 3 to 4 minutes. Did you get that? Thank you, Barbara. Dan, could you follow up and give how this county is in alignment with the city on the river and your perspective on that?
Yeah, so Dan Lafferty, Assistant Deputy Director of Public Works. And what some people may not realize is that housed within the Department of Public Works is the Los Angeles County Flood Control District. My position is as the Chief Planner for the Flood Control District. We work collaboratively very well with the city. We have in the Upper LA River, the Los Angeles River Cooperating Committee that takes a look at activities that are occurring and projects that are occurring along the LA River within the city bounds to make sure that things are being done as best they can be, consistent with sort of a long-term vision of what the river could be. Our agency, along with Corps of Engineers, has the primary responsibility for operations and maintenance of the flood control right-of-way for the LA River. We did a master plan last in 1996. We are just now beginning a revision to that process. We expect that that is going to be a very large undertaking, a pretty heavy lift for us. We expect that to be completed by 2020. And the idea for that plan is that it would indeed be not just a compilation of all the plans that have been done since 1996, but whatever other ideas folks may have for what could happen within the right-of-way and adjacent. We kind of refer to this more as a corridor plan, but the corridor isn't necessarily restricted to just what's within the flood control district right-of-way, but also those properties that may be adjacent. So the idea is to go out and solicit that input, work with the city and also all the cities that make up the municipalities in the lower LA River, and there are quite a few of those. So that effort is undergoing, and it's going to require a lot of collaborative input from a variety of people who have interests in the river. And we're certainly kind of excited to take on that project and help shepherd in whatever the vision we all have for the river may be.
Great. Dan, thank you. Nice job. So now we're going to have Mia and Brian Jordan. Mia Lara and Brian Jordan, their firms have been involved for the last decade with extensive work on the river, including the work with the city and the Corps and all 20. So Mia, you want to give us a background?
Yes. I always say that I talk about advocacy by design, and without design and images, I am not much. But today I know we're gonna want to talk about funding solutions and alternative solutions, but it's not letting me go forward. So the LA River Revitalization Master Plan was completed in 2007 and adopted by the City of Los Angeles unanimously by the City Council. It's 32 miles within the city, and of course there's another set of miles, about 11, below the river from Vernon down to Long Beach. There's the changing channel geometry creates tremendous challenges. In the San Fernando Valley, Glendale Narrows, downtown Los Angeles, it goes from 50 feet to about 700 feet across. And so of course it varies tremendously in terms of land uses and character. And for people in the city who haven't been to the river, there's a tremendous amount of activity now there. There always was some, but in particular over the last 10 years, the nonprofits and government agencies have created a series of bikeways. The kayaks are now available. We are a navigable river. All those were challenges and accomplishments by the mayor and others. So the first 32 miles, like I said, was the Revitalization Master Plan, and our goals were to revitalize the river, green neighborhoods, capture community opportunity, and create value. And we had a series of metrics and criteria that we were using, and we created about 240 projects that could be implemented, and depending on what communities the river was crossing, it created plans and therefore also grant opportunities to be set up. It helped crystallize and coordinate all the moving parts of the river. And these were some of the first photo montages that our offices had done, and we worked on this with with Civitas, Wank, and Tetra Tech, and getting the right people in the images, but just to see the before and after, which people always have imagined just as a channel, even though people like Deputy Mayor Romero said, and Ed Reyes used to play in the river and catch frogs and do all sorts of things. It had become much more impassable based on also train traffic and other industrial uses. So through downtown, there's been a series of newer efforts that are going on in the last a year or so, so we are, Tetra Tech will talk a little bit about the lower LA River, but I want to say that the mayor, the accomplishments we made was that the deputy mayor is focused on the river, that the river office was created both within the planning department and within the mayor's office, that there is River LA, which is a nonprofit, and that of those 240 proposed projects, there's probably about 60 going on right now, including G2, including major bikeways, including Albion Park, including Verdugo Wash Study. So there's a tremendous amount of work ongoing, and sort of the coordination with the county and the state in terms of funding is also really important.
Mia, thank you. Now, Brian, could you go up and continue?
Yeah, Dan and Mia touched on it. There's a lot of planning activities and a lot of implementation activities that are underway. So I wanted to touch on the lower LA River efforts that are going on right now. If you see my face in the program, you'll notice I'm labeled as Herb Wesson. I'm not Herb Wesson, believe it or not. But for those of you who saw him speak this morning, I share that same passion for LA, and our company does as well. Our company's Tetra Tech is headquartered here in LA. It was founded 50 years ago, and we've worked on the river for the better part of 3 decades now. So lots of experience, lots of observations, and the lower LA River master plan that Dan mentioned is effectively complete. The draft plan was issued before the holidays. The comments have been incorporated, and I's are being dotted and T's are being crossed on that now. And that focused on a work group process. So there's about a dozen different cities and communities around the lower LA River that last 10 or 11 mile stretch of the river, the concrete line channel that's kind of famous or infamous depending on your view. There were a couple dozen NGOs that were involved, so 3 or 4 dozen organizations made up the work group process, and they met over the course of less than 2 years a couple hundred times to come up with a framework for how to capture value from the lower LA River, with connectivity really being the ultimate goal. So how do you make the river function as a river, as a watershed, as Dan mentioned, as a flood control facility, but also how do you make it a nice place to be? How do you find ways to get people there and connect the natural, the built, and the social environment? So what you'll see in the plan is a couple hundred projects that are recommended. Mia mentioned over 200 projects in the Upper River Plan. There's a similar number in the Lower River Plan. What's maybe different in the Lower River Plan is there's 6 signature projects that are profiled there. You can go to the website. Just Google Lower LA River Master Plan. It'll take you right to the website. And you can see those 6 projects that are signature projects that will be implemented here in the near term and serve as an implementation effort to motivate more of the work to get done on the lower river, and then working with the county who's leading the effort to consolidate the plans. Hopefully we'll have some implementation efforts moving forward. Finally, what I'd like to highlight is the Lower River Plan also uses a framework for how to create these goals and balance the engineering requirements with the efforts that the community is interested in and all the other stakeholders interested in, and it ends up with a governance structure that's in place there to implement those projects on the lower river. And if you take a look at the plan, you'll see in great detail, if there's interest in furthering the governance structure, making it more permanent, there's a roadmap for those efforts as well.
Brian, thank you. Dr. Erdahl. Your firm, how are you? Your firm gave an unsolicited report proposal on the LA River. Could you give us a thumbnail sketch of that report and what you were proposing in it?
Definitely. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be representing AECOM and other large company headquartered in LA and committed to the success of City of LA's various programs, but especially LA River's revitalization and the city's push towards becoming water self-reliant, tapping into the local resources, and taking all of the above kind of an approach to water. This is definitely an exciting time to talk about LA River, looking at all the momentum that's behind all the efforts that are happening here. A lot of interested parties, and there's a lot of passion in this room and outside of this room. As Jack mentioned, we have, as AECOM, done an internal study bringing together various discipline experts looking at LA River revitalization plan, but also trying to take it to the next level, trying to find actual tangible solutions and benefits, looking at the current state of it and identifying specifics for improving the environment, improving the social state of it, and improving the economy, hence taking a triple bottom line approach to LA River and identifying solutions. That took us to actually the question of how do we make it happen, hence the funding. So I'm going to touch on the funding, and then I can answer more of your questions later on. And as we talk about funding, it's worth remembering that the City of LA currently has nearly about $1 billion in match. So there's money related to this, but it requires a lot more. So we want to sort of touch here how to take it to the next level and identify solutions that we have used elsewhere and others have used elsewhere and make it happen. So as we look at it, two big options appeared as we looked at this. The first one is public-private partnerships, P3, that we are hearing about more and more every day. And the other one is the integrated public funding strategies. Public-private partnerships, P3 solutions, you hear a lot about it in infrastructure and public space right now. First solution actually is very interesting. It combines a public governance scheme with P3. We are recommending establishing an enhanced infrastructure finance district, EFID. It's a mouthful, but it is really a very strong tool that has been used, and there are examples of it now in California, now that it has become an acceptable reality as part of, as a result of the SB 628 that was passed in 2014. And EFID allows the local governments to invest tax dollars and revenue in areas that are of importance to them. So this special district would have a special interest and would be allocating and funneling funds dedicated, set aside to benefit those causes. And most importantly, as I mentioned, it's a little unique. EFID, being a public structure, a public entity, also has the power to get into P3 relationships with private partners. So a P3 could be between an EFID and a public agency, like it could be between a local entity, a city, and a private entity. But it also will drive public interest and public money, and it doesn't have to be a specific P3 between an EFID and the P3 agency, but so it is a catalyst. It could be a catalyst, as we have seen elsewhere, to drive funding. The other solution is joint development of underutilized assets. I think there's a lot of discussion related to a couple of examples that I want to give here are LA Union Station, transforming it into a 6 million square feet transit-oriented community could be a good catalyst that can drive the LA River project and the funding that will come with it. Another example is the LA Civic Center, and there are many other smaller examples that can drive housing and economic policy goals. The other funding opportunity is really the integrated public funding strategies. These are shared interests that are put together by the public agencies, and funds that are allocated for these shared interests could be funneled into specific projects. A good opportunity or good example of this is the Cap and Trade program of California. That is a product of the AB 32 climate change mitigation legislation. And there are about $1 billion of funds that are available and could be directed to urban projects and sustainable transit-oriented projects.
Thank you. Can I ask you?
And lastly, because I'm water, I must say, I think one last thing we need to do as we take a look at all of these is really orient and align our water goals such as, healthy watersheds, improving water quality, water reclamation, stormwater utilization, all of these, and align them with the LA River so we can tap into a broader pot of money and serve our broader purposes.
Great. Yuval, hi. How are you?
Excellent.
Citing your experience and developments in LA, how can we develop the river outside the banks, be wildly successful without destroying those neighborhood cultures like Frogtown or repeat Chavez Ravine?
I don't know why I get to do the heavy lifting after. So I guess I'm sitting here because I'm a private sector real estate developer, but I prefer to have the hat of a citizen because it's actually much easier to look at the title, which was an interesting choice of P3. I woke up this morning and I forgot what was the third P. I remember private and public. I forgot what was the third one. Then later on, after coffee, I realized it's about the partnership. So, when we say public, we don't mean the public, us. We're talking about public sector. It's actually government. And when we say private, we typically mean large-scale organizations, corporations, design firms, contractors, and so on. And the tradition of P3 projects was basically invented where large infrastructure projects could have accelerated by basically subbing it out to a large enough and qualified entity that could take part of the investment and benefit part of the revenue stream down the line. So the easiest examples are obviously toll roads and freeways and bridges. And there's been plenty of experience in that, and I think municipalities and governments know how to do it very well. I think the difference with the LA River is that the vision and the plan is actually not there. Meaning we have a line of experts. I can tell you that as many people that sits on the table, there's as many opinions of what the river should be. And if you're coming from an engineering background or hydrology or flood control or equity, social sciences, health, there's lots of ways to look at the LA River. So as a citizen, and I happen to sit on a nonprofit called Friends of the Los Angeles River, I'm actually more interested in the simple view of, first of all, let's respect the river for what it is, which is a natural resource. And if we get it back to be more of a natural resource of what it is now, there's a good chance that everybody would benefit. Now, I recognize that, tearing down the concrete and maintaining safety for the city and for the adjacent neighborhoods is an expensive exercise, and we have to figure out how to finance it. But in my opinion, we really have to focus on what it is that it needs to look like, have a good consensus about it, and then look for ways for implementing it. And there's a good chance it's going to be a heavily government-funded exercise, because there's no revenue stream down the road. The only thing that is a revenue stream that was indicated before is basically the value of real estate next to the river. And that's something that I think we should be really careful, because although real estate values that go up can generate higher property tax, and the model of the redevelopment agency that was thought about in the first master plan, the first kind of quasi-private government organization was the LA River Revitalization Corporation. Was supposed to be like the redevelopment agency of what happens to real estate next to the river, and to capitalize on the increased value to kind of help fund some of the stuff, although there was no clear idea of what they should have funded other than their own overhead at the time. The other problem is we did an amazing job in creating the LA River Master Plan, but the land use regulation that had to follow and fill in the gaps of what happens next to the river was basically half-baked and never really implemented to its full potential. So there's a designation called RIO, R-I-O, and which is an overlay zone of what happens to real estate next to the river. And if you look at it today, it basically tells you what plants you can plant in your landscaping plan. But it really doesn't say much more. And the efforts that the planning department did over the last almost 10 years resulted with nothing more than just that. So there's a big vacuum of ideas of what needs to happen next to the river, and that is a cause for a lot of sensitivity and frustration for communities that can see what potentially can happen, where a major project on the river can really turn the life upside down. And although, yes, it would love to go back and play in a park, they says, well, but would that be a neighborhood for me at the end of the day, because I probably can't afford to rent there anymore? So all these things are kind of happening in the vacuum of a lack of serious planning and a serious commitment to basically just focus on the restoration of the ecosystem. 4 minutes?
Nice closure on the openings. So I'm going to come back with a question for each of you, and if we have more time, we'll listen to Mark respond to this. Barbara, I imagine.
What did I do to deserve this?
All right. So, Mark, just to give a positive, Mark has done some incredible work on the watersheds in Los Angeles, but I do like to tease him. Barbara, I imagine the costs are quite high. And so are there enough public funds, or is the city issuing bonds, or how are we going to pay for this?
So good projects attract money. And I think part of our challenge in making the river, implementing the reality of what we envision for the river, is looking at how do we do an integrated approach to these projects, and where do we focus on? I think the new frontiers, for example, downtown Los Angeles. You know, in Frogtown and Legion Valley, you know, we've done a lot of our parks. There is a lot of tension. There's been a lot of development, but I think if we're gonna do the right thing, we need to focus in downtown LA, where we can try some of this development, because I think, you know, even though people say there's not a lot of money, there is. You know, in the metro measure, there's over $400 million to connect Canoga Park, all the 32 miles of the LA River bike path. That would essentially connect Canoga Park to Long Beach. So that would be a 51-mile seamless bike path. That is a lot of money. We talk about this in SB1, in the water bond. There's over $100 million in the Los Angeles River. And the one the park bond that's actually gonna go on the ballot in June has another $100 million. So there is money, there is public money. And I think the question is, for people, and that's that at this point, and we're at a critical juncture, is how do we integrate it, you know, even stormwater measure, if we are gonna have one in the county, how do we integrate all these different public, you know, one-dimensional public funding sources and integrate them to create these projects, to implement these projects first. And then second is, how do we then look at the private sector to help us, you know, if we've done the public piece of it, how do we get the public investment, not just, you know, because you happen to have a project next to the river? What are the community benefits of that? Because I am very sensitive about the negative impacts of getting development next to the Los Angeles River. So part of that is, you know, it's how do you design it? What kind of benefits do you include? The Sunkist project is a project like in Sherman Oaks that the council office, our office said, we'll support the project, but what are you gonna do for the neighborhood? How can you link portion of the plan? So part of our job is to make sure we have consensus on what are those things when a developer comes to us, that we're clear on what are the public benefits, how can they build some of our project. Some of the other costs that we think are very expensive for like G2, for example, the cleanup costs. How do we work with the private sector to figure out solutions for remediation, to come up with money? The reason that took 20 years is because the public, you know, agency didn't want the liability for a dirty site. How do we get, you know, those contaminated sites along the river cleaned up? And then what's another leverage that the city has? We have underutilized land along the river. How do we consolidate our purposes and our uses on, we have over 13 yards along the Los Angeles River. How do we repurpose that and work with the private development and indicate, if you want to bid on this project, these are the 5 things that we need you to do on our behalf to ensure that we have those protections. So,
Nice job.
so those are some of the things. So, I like to change the conversation. Is from what there's not enough money. There is enough money. We just have to be more creative about how we work together to make the river a reality.
Great answer. Yeah, Brian, go ahead.
Zeynep talked about public-private partnerships as a funding option, and certainly the county and the city's leadership has been very valuable to advancing the effort. But the state plays a role too, and Barbara alluded to this. SB 5, which was the Parks and Housing Bond, officially qualified for the ballot last week. So it'll be Prop 68 on the June ballot. It's a $4.5 billion Parks and Water bond. $1.25 billion will go to water projects with some specific money dedicated to the LA River. And then in November, right now, there's a group of people qualifying an $8.9 billion water bond for the November ballot. The signatures have been gathered. Jerry Merrill was here yesterday. That should be qualified in the next 6 weeks or so for the ballot. So that'll be on the November ballot. Of the $8.9 billion, $200 million is dedicated to the LA River. And then, as some speakers talked about yesterday, Mark Pastrella, Katie Young, the county is working hard to get a stormwater tax on the November ballot. That would provide a couple $100 million a year for LA County for stormwater projects. With the LA River being one of the largest watersheds in the county, you can see there's a big opportunity there for the state, the county, and the city, and all of the other stakeholders, the Corps of Engineers, the nonprofits, to really partner together to have a funding source. You add that to the public-private partnership, some of the other ideas that the speakers talked about. There's a war chest out there, and then planning and programming that war chest is going to be really important.
Good. Thank you, Brian. Dan, can you, something I listened to as Barbara talked about the importance of starting downtown. And the city has the largest, significantly, frontage along the LA River. Speak how that can work while still you continue to have projects develop in Long Beach. And she mentioned the bike path going all the way to Long Beach. That's a great project. But speak to that from the county perspective on how you see the governance and us moving forward with the significant miles in the LA City.
Yeah, well, clearly, with the bulk of the frontage of the LA River being within the confines of the city of Los Angeles, they're clearly the major stakeholder when it comes to municipalities or actually any other entity. When you look at the LA River, you've got the county, the flood control district, and the Corps, who have the primary responsibilities for maintaining the flood control capacity and also operating and maintaining the channels itself. But then when you start looking outside of that, when you start looking outside of the actual right-of-way, the next player at the table is the city. Certainly the cities in the lower LA River, likewise, when it comes time for projects that affect their communities, they're obviously going to have a voice in what happens. And it's our job, quite frankly, to make sure that all those voices are being heard. That, as sort of the regional entity that kind of has some authority over the entire length of the LA River, it's important for us to make sure that we're listening to everyone. And whatever those ideas may be, how do we fold those into the reality of maintaining flood hazard mitigation for the communities, but then also providing community amenities that enhance and further the well-being of people's lives. And it's a tall order, quite frankly. But I think, we've had some success to date, and I think that with the effort that we're going to be beginning in terms of revisiting the master planning effort and trying to combine all of those great ideas that have already taken place and whatever others are out there, I think that we do have an opportunity to make sure that we are incorporating all of the ideas and all of the visions that others have for what can happen both alongside, but also maybe potentially even within the right-of-way that we own and operate. So, it's really an exercise on our part of engaging and having those conversations, listening to the ideas that people have, and trying to find that sweet spot of where we can maintain the functionality that is necessary for health and safety, but then also adding into that the components that make for a well-rounded, well-balanced life here in Los Angeles.
And Dan, Barbara talked about this, but to emphasize the importance of you have a stormwater bond and how it can help. So everybody here in the audience hope can go out and advocate how important that bond is for for our watershed, but also for the LA River.
The water bond that's on the ballot by the state?
Yes. But no, in fact, no,
The
November,
funding, the funding
stormwater
measure.
bond.
So, I can't. I can tell you that the,
Okay, so I just, I'll emphasize it.
we'll give that to Mark. We'll give that.
So, Mia, I'm gonna return to this issue, and I understand you might have some unique ideas to preserve Frogtown and the communities in terms of funding. Can you give us a brief outline on that? And Dan, sorry for putting you on the spot.
First of all, I want to commend the Verde Exchange for bringing these kinds of opportunities for dialogue, because transparency is not always there, and environmental justice and social justice is so important, as Dan has mentioned, and equity. There has been a couple convenings in Los Angeles recently, and perhaps today the news of Amazon and Hathaway deciding that they're going to do a healthcare plan that doesn't count on profit, but actually just wants to do good. Turns out that many of the banks have social impact funding that they are now deploying onto projects. So part of the issue sometimes, as hard as all the agencies try to fund projects, is actually being able to fund the projects in an effective, efficient, and quick way. So there's these private equity funding sources now that have developed where in JP Morgan has its social impact funding. It basically offers the funding out for green infrastructure, pays for the project directly to the consultants, and then as the consultants deliver the project, then the agency gets paid back, gets paid. So there's this sort of flow through, and it's extremely interesting. And the other one is sort of proactive strategic plans for the neighborhoods. A mile or two circumference, for example, at the Potomac, there's an organization that got formed, and before the actual project, which is a very large river projects that are going to get built on a bridge, there is a strategic plan that's ongoing, and again, several banks have put money out, so you can deal with issues like, let's say, economic education for the community, working with the students from the neighborhoods that are actually going to potentially be impacted by the new development, and trying to engage them and engage the communities in funding for housing. So in the case of that particular project, which is the 11th Street Bridge project, they now have $50 million for affordable housing.
Mia, can I stop you there, just so we got less than 5 minutes?
Okay.
Even
Just
though I
want to
know-
say that affordable housing HH hasn't been mentioned, and it's another pot of funds that could be used.
And then I'm gonna let Barbara speak, and then I'm sorry, but I'm gonna let
Yes,
Dr.
sure.
Bowl talk and
Yes.
respond for
Yes.
the last.
Sure.
So the River Master Plan, it was a 50-year plan, but I have a deadline that the mayor put on me by winning the 2028 Olympics. And for me, that, he looks at it as a framework. How do we want to envision the river when we have people come here? We want it to be a destination site. We also want to demonstrate that we could have affordable housing along the LA River, that we could recreate, that we could celebrate, and that we can demonstrate and showcase how we manage our water along the Los Angeles River. So we have a unique opportunity to do that, and I just want to say, as I say to everybody who comes and sees me, is like, yes, at the end of the day, my job on a day-to-day basis is to try to find the money. And if you have ideas of how to fund it, I am open and always available to talk to you about it, but also to talk about how we do it in a responsible and deliver community benefits. Because if you really look at the city of Los Angeles, we don't really have a good portfolio of P3s. And why is it? Is because the public, doesn't trust that there is gonna be a benefit for them, and the river is personal to a lot of people, and we have to show them that the only way we're gonna do this is with private investment, and that we could be a global city and have a global river, you know, that it has been done all over the world, and we just have to, you know, get together and get it done now, because we do have a deadline, 2028. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Dr. Gold, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I've never had a peanut gallery roll from up here. It's usually down there, so that's pretty interesting. But a couple things. It's great to see so much extraordinary momentum around the river. There's been so much progress, especially on individual park projects along the river, that give me a lot of hope. But I'm here to also remind you, you know me, always pessimistic, but this is actually something else just from the standpoint of looking at the river. It's as you've all brought out very clearly, we can't lose sight of what's between the banks, not just what's alongside the banks. And there's not enough focus going on right now on the flows in the river, the water quality in the river, the biological resources in the river, all of which are highly degraded. The water bodies listed as impaired under the Clean Water Act for everything from trash to nutrients to toxic metals and the like. So there's a lot that needs to be done on the river. And with that, we also have these goals on local water that are quite extraordinary. You know, we want to use all of the water coming from our inland treatment plants for water supply, right? And so to recycle as much of that water as humanly possible. We want to do a much better job of infiltrating our stormwater and having it go and replenish our aquifers. And that'll obviously reduce pollutant loads and add to our local water supplies with our groundwater basins. But if we don't do that in a very smart way, you can actually get to the point of drying out the river. And that's something that we just finished a study at UCLA that took a hard look at that. And I'm not saying that that's the direction we're all going, but we need to plan for how we're moving forward. And I see Regional Water Quality Control Board member Irma Munoz in the audience. I urge for the Regional Water Board working with the state to really take leadership on what actually happens between the banks and start a planning process there, because frankly, you guys hold the cards on what's actually going to happen in the river on balancing those beneficial uses so that we can really optimize the river for not only recreation and aesthetics, but of course for the aquatic life that has suffered for decades with what's happened in the river. And then lastly, just to wrap up, since I know we're running out of time, is looking at the watershed as a whole, and people talk about it, but a lot of the people who are working on the river are not also the same people who are looking at the entire 850 approximate square miles within the LA River watershed. And what happens in the Angeles Forest, what happens in Tujunga, what happens in Sunland and Pacoima and Canoga Park really matters to the entire LA River watershed and the LA River. And unless we really take that into consideration and make sure that everything we're doing on the stormwater side is integrated with all this LA River planning effort, we're going to have a disconnect that's going to be really, really major, and I'm very fearful of that. And one of the things that will help tremendously, and I know this is a funding panel, is we have to, it's a decade overdue. I keep joking, it's the 10th anniversary of LA County contemplating a stormwater parcel tax to fund this huge need that's been there for over a decade in Los Angeles County to bring dollars in to do much better job on watershed management, stormwater pollution reduction, as well as water supply capture, infiltration into the ground. We have to have those funds available. That will be in November. Very, very difficult, 2/3 vote required. Frankly, there's nothing more important, I'd say, for the river and for the region as a whole on moving forward in an integrated water management approach in a sustainable fashion than the passage of that in November.
Art, nice closure. With that, I'm going to close the session. We're over time, right, Russ? So we're right on time. Thank you all. Vote in November.